Hello and welcome to Talking Politics. Today we'll be looking at the work MPs have carried out in their constituencies, the effect of this work on the constituents and on the community and also on the nation as a whole. And I have with me here David Burrows, who's been the MP for Enfield. David, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Nice to meet you now, David. Why should people vote David Burrows?
Well, I mean, I've been, as you said, the Member of Parliament here in Endfield Southgate nearly for the last 10 years. And I've grown up in this area. I've served the community as a local councillor. I've been involved as a solicitor, married with 6 children here, just live and breathe this community. And there's nothing more I like than to be able to stand up and speak up for my area and serve it. And that's what motivates me. Not a love of power or career, but a love of service, a desire to speak up for human dignity, for compassion, for social justice, for helping the vulnerable. And that's the thing I seek to do as a Member of Parliament for this community and also as a Conservative.
Which means you have a relationship with the people in the community,
Yeah.
in your constituency,
Yeah.
and they know you very well.
Yeah, that's right. We're part and parcel of the community. I'm not sort of set apart. And I live here and have done all my life in different parts of this area of sort of outer North London. And and my children and family all here. And so it's a real delight to be able to serve them. And so I suppose what I'm saying to the constituents of Endfield Southgate is, look, I've been here for the last 10 years. I have a real desire to continue to serve you, to be that strong local voice and to speak up for Endfield Southgate, but also issues that go beyond the constituency that affect the nation. And I'd like to do that for another 5 years, as long as people of Endfield Southgate want it.
We'll see. And we'll be talking about the work you've done in the nation. But first of all, you are chair of the Christian Conservative Fellowship.
Yeah.
And you advocate for Christians to be deeply involved in politics. Why?
Yeah, I mean, when 25 years ago, as a student at Exeter University, another student called Tim Montgomery, together we were interested and active as students in politics. And we saw around us in all levels of the party that there were Christians around, but they were somewhat isolated. They needed support, and we wanted to provide that. We were surprised it wasn't there already. We wanted to provide that fellowship. You know, what united us within the party, and in fact unites Christians from all different political parties, is Christ, is being Christians, and that's what it's a Conservative Christian fellowship. And so the Christian is the central part to it. And in fact, even with the party, we come with different views. What we're committed by is the fact that part of loving your neighbour is to be involved in politics, and politics is God's business. He cares passionately about authorities, that is his servant, and it's important for his servants to be involved, to do his service. And so that's the encouragement that we wanted to do for others in the party. So we set it up. We were encouraged by MPs at that time saying, look, please, let's start a Conservative Christian Fellowship. And it grew from then to now be, a central part within the Conservative Central Office. It's their staff there who are actively engaged in supporting Christians at all levels, trying to encourage them to be salt and light, being a bridge between Christians and the churches and the Conservative Party, and encouraging people and equipping people to be really active in public life.
Why do you encourage Christians to vote and be active in politics?
Yeah, well, it's a fundamental obligation on all of us to vote, but Christians have no excuse. They have no excuse because, look, Christians would say, I should be involved in church. That's a given, isn't it? But that was established by God to reflect his order and character. So they think, yes, we should be involved in church. People go to church, Christians, so that's fine. Then Christians say we should be involved in supporting marriage. That's an institution. That's an institution that was ordained by God to, again, reflect his character and order. And then we've got authority in government, again, similarly established by God, as much as the other two, to reflect his character and order. And so we should be as much involved in that as well. And so we have an obligation to be active. And the very least of obligations is to vote. Certainly we should be praying and we should be active, involved in different ways.
What are your most significant contributions to public life, both locally and nationally?
Well, I really seek to be a strong voice for my area, and that means advocating often for individual matters for constituents. And I suppose that can be reflected by a particular example of one constituent who had a story that became nationally known. His name is Gary McKinnon. He was someone who, not far away from here in North London, he was in Palmer's Green. He was there at his computer He had Asperger's syndrome, and that particularly focused him into computers. And so he was there into his computers, and he ended up hacking into the computer systems of the United States, got into the NASA, into the top level, got into the US Naval Fleet systems. And that was obviously a wrong thing to do, and he needed to be dealt with for that. But to cut what was a long story short was that the US authorities wanted to extradite him to America. And over 10 years there was a legal battle where he became mentally ill and his life was at risk. He was going to kill himself if he was extradited, to be locked up for some 60 years they were wanting to do. And we said there should be justice here, that we shouldn't just throw him out off to America. And so myself and indeed the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary all said we would in government, because the previous government was going to extradite him, we would make sure that he wasn't extradited. So I fought that long battle. I stood up for him in Parliament. I challenged everyone about that tirelessly with his wonderful mother, and it became a national issue about whether he should be extradited or not. This vulnerable young man, that we should show compassion. And if we said that we were going to keep him here, we should stick to our promises. All that was encapsulated in me making sure long and hard that that didn't happen. And eventually, the Prime Minister and Home Secretary decided no, he should not be extradited. And so that was really good to see. And that's just an example of advocating on behalf of constituents. Another example is the issue of knife crime, which has blighted particular areas of London, but the country, and not least here in Enfield. People have tragically lost their lives, young people particularly. And so I saw that as a real issue. I've got a background as a solicitor in issues of criminal justice, that we need to do a number of things to support people not getting into knife crime. But also one of the areas is to people know that if you do get caught with a knife, that the punishment will be one that leads to a prison sentence. And that deterrence should be there. And our law wasn't tough enough on that. So I've campaigned hard on the issue of knife crime, and eventually was able to, with the support of a colleague, Nick DeBroy in Enfield North, work together to make sure that we toughened up knife crime law. And that came about from a local issue that became a national change.
And that has really brought out the figures for knife crime. It has been brought very low because of that campaign.
Part of that campaign, and obviously it's part of preventing people turning to knives, turning to gangs, realising we need to support the family, we need to support good mentoring. All that has to come into the package, but also realising that the law is clear and the message is out there that if you carry a knife, that you should expect to go to prison.
Now, one of your main pledges in your recently launched manifesto is to eliminate the deficit and be running a surplus by the end of Parliament. But your party made that same pledge 5 years ago, which was to eliminate bulk of the deficit, and that wasn't achieved.
No.
What is your party going to do to restore confidence?
Yeah, well, the reality is that we would have liked to have balanced the books sooner, but we were left with that famous note which said there's no money left by the previous government. Good luck. And what it also did not reveal is the huge extent of the debt and the deficit. And during the process of being in government and in the Eurozone crisis and everything that was happening, it was challenging to be able to completely balance the books. We'd have liked to have done it sooner, but what we were left was deeper than we thought in terms of both the deficit and the debt. We were borrowing £150 billion a year, and that's huge. And so we've done what we could. We also wanted to be careful to make sure that the challenging, difficult decisions, which meant reducing the amount of public spending, did not fall on those who couldn't withstand that, on the poorer, on those vulnerable people. And we needed to do it sensitively and carefully. So it's taken time, and we haven't finished the job yet, but we have restored confidence. We now have an economy that is the envy of Europe, that we're creating more jobs than the rest of Europe put together, and that's really encouraging. And that means that there's families who've not known work before, 600,000 families where children have not known any work in a generation, and now at last can see a mum or dad going out to work, and that transforms people and is the best way out of poverty. So we've got there. It's taken longer, and it's going to take some time to still make continued difficult decisions, but we want to, in the next 2 years, completely balance the books and ensure that we're then driving down the debt that is on us all. It's equivalent to like £40,000 on each of us and our children's heads, effectively, that really is paying for interest. That should be going into school, should be going into health services. And so we want to just bear down that debt. And like any family housekeeper knows that you can't keep the credit card going up. And we maxed out on that previously. We're dealing with the credit card as best we can, balancing the bank account and trying to make sure that it gets into a bit of savings and surplus so that we can ensure that, if we get into any rocky times again, and we're not out of the woods yet around economies, we can use that surplus to make sure we don't go back into the times we did under the previous government, which left us debt-ridden and facing high taxes and making it difficult to support those vital public services we want to do.
So you think if the Conservatives are in power for the next 2 years, we should be back in surplus?
By the end of those 2 years is that we'll effectively balance the books, and the following year we expect to be then going to surplus.
Okay, on education, you said zero tolerance for failure, and pupils in England who get poor results in their SATs at the end of primary school will face a resit in secondary school. For over a generation, there has been no resit at primary or secondary school, and how would this be implemented?
Well, it's challenging because the reality is that what we inherited was not only a financial legacy, which was really deeply challenging, and a deficit of finance, but also a deficit of skills, of people coming out of primary school education, being able to basically read, write and add up. 1 in 3 children was not able to do that, and particularly in disadvantaged and poorer areas of districts, that was even worse. And that was letting down people. And so the way we have to deal with that is, obviously we want to encourage good teachers and good head teachers. We know that what makes, supported by parents, makes a good school. But we also need to recognise that if it's not happening, then we can't sit back, and we must encourage people to have the expectation that they're going to be able to read, write and add up, and that then allows them to progress in secondary school. Otherwise, I've been a school governor for many years, and I've seen far too many children getting into secondary school age who themselves can't really do the basic literacy and numeracy skills. That's just making sure they're not going to be able to get on and do A-levels or GCSEs or anything near to that, or any other vocational training. So we need to equip them better. So it means that we're going to challenge schools that aren't up to the basic mark. And this is basic mark. We're talking, things that we should expect. And we're not able to compete in the rest of the world, let alone get jobs for our children now. So we're going to be as rigorous as possible to ensure that standards improve. Now, we are slowly getting there. We've got 1 million more children in good and outstanding schools, but we're passionate about improving standards for the benefit of children, so our children can have the best opportunities of all when they move into secondary school and out into a job or into university.
What schemes do you think your party can actually employ to ensure parents support their children at home? Because a lot of times when kids are from dysfunctional homes, they hardly concentrate in class. Yeah,
and that is a huge problem. And teachers have a really tough job, because it's not just dealing with the basic educational skills. They're having to deal with a lot of other background issues. And so it's not easy, and I pay great tribute to teachers. They've been challenged, and in some ways they'd want government to back out of things and let just teachers get on and teach. And they've had so many different directives and things they've got to do next and changes. And so we want to allow teachers to be able to do that. We try to reduce the amount of actual interference in some ways from government. I think there can be particularly targeted support for families that have issues and challenges, and we've had a Troubled Families programme that's trying to pull together all the different agencies and groups, and there's so many different different people that people who've had challenges, multiple needs, have to speak to. We try to pull that together and really work through those troubled families issues, and so we are seeing those lives lifted out of poverty, lifted out of a cycle of difficult times, to ensure that they are able to get back into education properly. It may be for the parent to be able to get into work, or just start to build standards of behaviour and support. Maybe health issues, mental health issues, drugs and alcohol issues. All those things need coordination, and we've done that. And we're trying to extend that to mental illness as well, and complex needs around that. So there's some real challenges about, but we must make sure that no child, there's no excuse for children not to be able to get through an education system, to be able to read and write and send. And we can all remember a great head teacher, a great teacher, and it's those who can drive things through with governors and parents alongside them. And so we try to do that. And so we've been encouraging schools to be set up by the community, by faith schools who do a great job, and encourage more of those schools to run. And sometimes it means taking over schools that haven't succeeded. And we've seen some really good results from that.
Looking at figures that came out this week regarding drugs in schools, figures from 34 police forces show that there have been over 2,000 incidents between 2011 and 2014 of children being found with drugs in school, and one child was only 8 years old. Now, with your experience in knife crime, what ideas do you have that we can use to bring down the rate of drugs in schools?
I mean, an area that I've been really involved in locally, but particularly nationally, is drug and alcohol policy. I was involved in the shaping of our strategy in 2010 on drugs and alcohol, and part of that is about wanting to make sure that we prevent people taking drugs in the first place. We have seen actually the numbers of young people taking drugs reduce. It's still too high, and there's a real worry, particularly around cannabis, which has a particular strong impact. The strong nature of cannabis, called skunk, that really affects our young people. I've got 4 teenage children myself, 2 primary school, and we have to talk it through as parents with them about the issues of drugs. We need to support families and give them, strengthen them to be able to recognise that that's where it first give them the right role models, particularly men. Fathers have a big role to play here. We need to encourage more men and more fathers to be in the home and around the home and giving time, to help their and create those models. But it's mothers as well. But I think fathers have a particular responsibility. So in school, it's about really good, high quality education, preventing people taking drugs. That often it's the voluntary groups that are best at that. I've been supporting, for example, the Amy Winehouse Foundation. Amy Winehouse grew up and went to school just around here in Southgate. Her father, after the tragic death of Amy, decided that what he wants to do is get into schools and get people who are in recovery, who are the best advocates. People in recovery are very powerful. I've met inspirational people as a Member of Parliament, but the most inspirational people are those in recovery from drugs and alcohol. They go into school and they tell the students what it's like, what they shouldn't do, and encouraging them just to take the right path. That's really powerful, and so encouraging those kind of actions is really good.
Let's look at your housing policy. 200,000 homes built for first-time buyers aged under 40 at 20% discount. Now, with the current crisis and increase in property prices, especially in London, and you are in the heart of London here, an increasing number of people have found it very difficult to get a mortgage, especially those over the age of 40. Now, do you have any schemes in place for these group of people?
Yeah, I mean, there's a real focus on wanting to increase the supply of housing. It's very difficult around London. We've got a 1 billion fund that we're planning to particularly focus on brownfield sites and to ensure that that's done as quick and speedily as possible. The focus, as you said, on the 200,000 starter homes, which will have that discount. There is for first-time buyers also. There is support for mortgages to provide some discount for first-time buyers to get them on the rung. So there is that package in it, but it's difficult around London
because for the first-time buyers, most banks would always give mortgages to those under 40, but once they get over 40, it's now pretty difficult.
Yeah, I'm not going to illusions that it's difficult, and there's the reality with these issues or other issues is that there is only so much that government can do, and only so much the government have been able to do at the moment because public finances were so stretched and short, and we've got to take careful decisions to keep the economy going, to ensure, and the reason why the economy needs to be going in housing is that we've only now just been able to get going on construction, to allow housing to be built, and to be built efficiently and well, to allow that more opportunities and more supply of housing, and that needs a good, strong economy to provide a good, strong housing sector. So it is all linked. It's taking time. We have been able to build more new houses than happened under the previous government, but it's still not enough. And so that's part of the road to recovery that needs to happen. And certainly I recognise in London. The way we're looking also creatively is with Boris Johnson to work up with him ways to use public land that is redundant as a way to try and find ways, some office blocks, those we're turning those into housing, looking at creative ways to make sure that there are more opportunities.
Okay. Now, in March 2015, you presented a report about the persecution of Christians in Iran to Tobias Ellwood, the Foreign and Commonwealth Minister And
Yes.
that report actually urges the British government to use appropriate channels to urge Iran to uphold its obligations under international law
Yes.
concerning human rights.
Yes.
Before we go into the report, the migrant crisis in Italy has really been an issue, and Christians have been persecuted in Iran, in Iraq, in Syria, and recently on a migrant ship, 15 Muslims threw 12 Christians into the Blue Sea. Now, has there been any feedback on that report?
It's that report was a sort of updated report on a previous one from 2 years before that was setting out from the Christians in Parliament group, the severe levels of persecution for Iranians. One country, we could go to other countries around, there's North Africa, Central Africa to around the Middle East. That it's appalling that sadly Christians are the most persecuted of groups. So what we've called upon is for there to be action. Now, relationships with Iran is something which is thawing, and we're trying to make sure that as relationships perhaps build up with Iran, that the issue of religious freedom is central to it. Under the government, all the ministers are now very much charged with the responsibility to champion religious freedom. And so it's not just about having a particular envoy for religious freedom, that every minister, when they go around the different countries, because it's across the world, there's lots of persecution, sadly, is that part of their duty and responsibility is to tackle the issue of religious freedom. So on that particular report, Tobias Aylward was very positive in his response. He recognised there are limitations of what the government can do. I met also with Iranian MPs that came as on delegation. They invited me to Tehran to actually visit churches and others, to see for myself, and so it's up for us to build up those relationships, and our international aid, of which we are proudly able to say that we've stuck to the 0.7% of GDP. Part of that I think should be conditional on what's happening with religious freedom. So countries that are persecuting Christians, I think we should really ask the question really about international aid. Should we be giving it to certain countries and governments that are causing such problems to Christians and others? That should be conditional on our taxpayers' money, I feel. It's appalling what's happened off Italy. Thankfully, the Navy's going out there, emergency assistance, which is part of our international aid commitment. And it's desperate. There needs to be coordination about trying to ensure that before people take that step onto the boat, that there is a proper assessment to ensure that those fleeing persecution are provided sanctuary. We should pay our part to that. I think we should give as much support as possible in terms of refugee support here, as well as international aid in their home countries, and refuges around when international conflict. It's complicated. We need to recognise that the people responsible for this as well primarily are the human traffickers. They are appalling, exploiting human beings for profit. We've passed, under this government, the Modern Slavery Bill, which is a huge achievement that sadly shouldn't be needed after the days of those like William Wilberforce that abolished transatlantic slavery. To be in the situation now where there's appalling exploitation and slavery is something which is desperate, but which we have led across the world. Part of that is an international collaboration to ensure that the good work that we're doing here, the National Crime Agency, is shared abroad to make sure these traffickers aren't able to prey on vulnerable people. So that we need to get to those traffickers and root them out as well.
Thank you, David. One last word for voters out there. What would you want to tell them about the upcoming elections?
Well, the upcoming election is really important. It's important because you're voting for your individual member of parliament, and you should check them out. Check out what their views are on issues of values that we've spoken about human dignity, about respect for life, about marriage and the family, because they're crucial votes that have happened that are matters of conscience in the past parliament that are decided. Numbers matter. It matters how many MPs go into a division lobby and where they vote. It matters. Look, when I was first elected as a member of parliament, it was down to one vote on issues of religious freedom, providing the freedom for people for street preachers. It was down to one vote, and like I said, that was my one vote that allowed a protection clause to give people the freedom to preach. That's why it matters to vote. You must please vote. Please check out your member of parliament, what their views are on their values, their character. It matters. Lots of issues of conscience, crossover political party issues. But at the end of the day, you're voting for who you want to run the country, and crucially, who should run the economy of this country. Should we go back to a debt-ridden, high-taxed economy that was really letting down individuals and the poorest most and public services? Or should we continue along the path of the long-term economic plan that I think we need to do so, that provides stable leadership under Prime Minister David Cameron?
Thank you very much, David. Viewers, this is Talking Politics, and I have been interviewing David Burrows, who's been the MP for Enfield. Now, if you've got any questions, you can send emails to talkingpolitics@loveltv.co.uk. See you next time and enjoy the rest of our programs.